Well, hi everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Feeling Smarter. My name is Aaron Dunn. Of course, I'm joined as always by Tim Miller. G'day, Tim. How are you?
Yeah, going pretty well, Aaron. How are you doing?
Not too bad, thank you. I should have actually said happy new financial year because this is our first Feeling Smarter of the 2024-2025 year. And today's topic was to just do a bit of a update around where things got to at the end of the financial year. And Tim, probably leaning over to you here, there's been three really big ticket items ultimately that we have followed quite closely over the past 2 years, probably. It almost is now, or it's at least 18 months in some respects. But I might get you to sort of kick things off, and I'll let you choose which one you want to start with as well.
Well, look, I'll start from, I guess, the oldest one, and that is the one that has been around ultimately since 2018, which is the introduction of the amendments, because the NALI law is in place. The NALI law change, or the non-arm's length expenditure rules are in place, but we had the amendments to those laws that imposed a 2x expense factor on general expenses, which was largely only going to impact self-managed and small APRA funds. And so we've been waiting. This is, in theory, this is the culmination of all the information from the LCR 2021/2, where now we have some certainty around how general expenses will be treated. And we saw that legislation finally pass in the last week of the financial year.
Yeah, so we've now seen that receive royal assent. So in essence, it's become an act. And Tim, you touched on that 2x multiple, but what does this actually mean for those impacted by these changes of law, which in many instances are professionals working with a self-managed fund and understanding what hat they're really wearing? Are you wearing a trustee hat, or are you wearing a hat in a capacity other than as trustee of the fund?
Yeah, and I guess this is an area that you and I have spoken about a lot over the last 2 years. And one of the key things that I think people have to be aware of now is that what this means is, from a regulatory point of view, that certainly accounting firms, administration firms, anyone that's dealing with self-managed super funds needs to particularly have in place policies for if they're offering discounting, particularly to staff members and themselves, around, say, administration accounting fees. That there is at least some consistency there, and you can justify what is or isn't being charged because of whether you're doing it in your individual or in trustee capacity. And so it's really just having clarity around those issues.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's move on to the other couple of topics. And I've said for a long period of time, these two have been intrinsically linked since they were both announced in sort of January, February 2023. And that is our objective of superannuation legislation. And then what subsequently followed fairly quickly thereafter, our Division 296 tax rules as we now know them. So let's kick off first with our objective of super, because it's kind of taken a bit of a back seat from a policy setting point of view when we had a Labor government that was sort of bull at a gate trying to get this going. Yet the question now needs to be asked whether this just might dissipate into nothing like we saw it back in 2016.
Yeah, so this is not the first attempt of having an objective of super bill introduced, and probably the most relevant one was that 2016 pre the super reform. And of course, that never eventuated beyond draft format, but we still saw plenty of changes to the superannuation environment after that. And given that this current measure is again meant to be there to drive policy more than anything else, so to drive policy rather than to drive, say, trustee behaviours or anything else, it kind of feels like it was a measure introduced to say, okay, we're going to take superannuation seriously, and this is the path we're going to go. But then they don't take superannuation seriously enough to actually impose such a legislation or such a piece of legislation. And yeah, will it come in? Won't it come in? Who knows? It just seems to have stalled.
Yeah, and I think my gut feel is that I think the government would still be committed to it. We have seen it go through a Senate inquiry, and the report in essence came back with, tick the box, let's kind of move on based upon the definition that existed at this point in time. But, for what was something that was deemed to be so important and really framed up, as I mentioned, the Division 296 rules, we now seem to have those Division 296 rules much further ahead, which is somewhat surprising, because if you're trying to legislate or trying to set a framework around superannuation that is about equity, fairness, sustainability, and those sorts of things, you kind of want to lock that stuff down first before you start tinkering with the framework, in particular when we think about this new additional tax that is proposed around the $3 million threshold.
Yeah, and look, and I think probably the one thing about that objective of superannuation bill is one thing that it didn't have in it was accountability. And so, it didn't actually hold any governments accountable to the bill itself. And so, there's still water under the bridge in that regard. But yeah, you're right. The issue is that now we've progressed so far with Div 296, and there's still a little bit to play out there. Hence why, the government clearly wanted to give people 12 months preparation for its introduction, where we're going to bypass that, or we've obviously already bypassed that. So it's really going to be a matter now of how do the two parts of Parliament come together, because clearly there's not really any issue from the House point of view. All the issues sit within the Senate, which is, in theory, it's good news for the industry if there's issues within the Senate, because it might lead at least to some areas that we want to see reviewed. It may lead to some of them being reviewed. Ultimately, it also may not.
Yeah, and I guess talking a bit further about that Division 296 legislation, we are expecting it to be introduced back into the House of Representatives later this week, being the second week of that winter sitting period. And as you'd indicated, Tim, we do expect that final reading to go through. There have been some flags raised by a couple of the Teals in particular, but really where the rubber's going to hit the road here is around what gets resolved at a Senate level. Now, Labor seem to have a couple of challenges in front of them now, what currently appears. So, the Greens kind of got what they wanted originally, but have had a couple of dissenting views in the final report from the Senate report previously. So whether they kind of dig their heels in on those aspects. And of course, we have seen the SMSF Association up in Canberra over the past week or so. And in scope of that, I guess, meeting and discussions that have happened with a couple of the crossbench senators, there does appear to be some light at the end of the tunnel. And I say some light because it's not about, in my view, that we'll see a removal of the tax, but really talking to them about the faults that sit within the mechanisms and potentially other mechanisms that may therefore be far more palatable to those that have those much higher balances.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, yeah, look, what will the final outcome be? Your guess is as good as mine.
Yes.
But hopefully at the very least we see some changes from what we've seen introduced to this point.
Yeah, and the most important thing, Tim, here, I think, out of all this is just don't jump the gun early, because those that do jump early on this may be left in an unfortunate position. And that may be that they're taking money out where the rule changes maybe aren't as bad as what had been indicated. And I keep throwing back, we're now into the rollout of the stage 3 tax cuts. And if you remember the language of the Prime Minister and the Treasurer, we will not be changing stage 3 tax cuts. We will not be changing stage 3 tax cuts. We will not be changing stage 3 tax cuts. Well, what do we have from the 1st of July? Changes to stage 3 tax cuts. So a lot of the work that we're going to see in this is really going to fall back into the halls of Canberra and the negotiations that occur there. But most importantly, we're not going to get any resolution on this before August now as well, because this is the last week of sitting in Canberra before the winter break. It is scheduled for Thursday this week, which is in essence the last day. And then they don't reappear until the middle of August. So we're going to still have a period of uncertainty on this Division 296 for some time. It's frustrating, but hopefully all of the advocacy work that is being done may ultimately pay dividends.
Yeah, let's wait and see.
Let's wait and see, huh? So, well, thanks again for joining us for this week. We'll be talking about all these sorts of things, including some of the Div 296 as well. We have a SMSF pensions masterclass scheduled for August. You can find out a bit more about that by visiting our events page, smartersmsf.com/events. Thanks again, Tim, for your time.
No worries, Aaron. I look forward to joining you next week.
Thanks very much. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.